Now, those who know that during the 80s, there was a plan to use specifically the Middle East as a testing ground for the development of particular kinds of biological weapons. I think we're supposed to have forgotten about that, and we're supposed to refuse to consider how that factors into Middle East policy ever since, including up until now. But then we also refuse to acknowledge that there were certain benchmarks even in that strategy for those who think that it's somehow acceptable to have a strategy such as that didn't get covered and that have accrued. I know that there is a propensity for things like small airplanes to crash. There is ample evidence in public notices going all the way back to the 80s that these planes tend to have a benchmarking associated with them. For instance, in the old fashioned days when you had newspapers, you could see where the acknowledgement of that plane crash, the people that died in the plane, however they were characterized, would be placed on the page with other information or within the context of the specific publication. And their death and the public announcement about their death, which would be necessary in terms of claiming access to certain kind of end of life benefits, or for the purposes of any sort of litigation that might go into trying to challenge the aircraft maker if necessary, or any other factors that could be adjudged to have been involved in a wrongful death situation, would also be connected with other things that had happened on that day. That's somebody's proprietary trading model. It may be a standard that may go back. If you treated me collegially, there might have been a greater forthcomingness about these implications. But what I understand is that there are people that hide behind crime at a very high level and leverage their capacity to cover your ass while you engage in crime. And sometimes, in order to cover your ass for crime, what they need is to down a plane. They need to down a plane. See, it's not just insurance for a deed already committed, but it's also a down payment on a future deed. I understood with the information that I put in here about those planes specifically that this was part of an accrual, that those planes included people that were on a passenger manifest, and depending on who they were associated with or what they were doing and where they were going, they may have already been on an insurance policy specific for that event to which they were traveling, or they may be on some sort of diplomatic or some sort of official capacity in their flight, which I understand was happening with the Lion Air flight to Ethiopia specifically. And then that passenger list is used as almost a loan while they're in flight. And if you have it ahead of time, and or you're somebody that has access to the information and can coordinate with somebody that has access to the human capital associated with the people they're in or with other things they're assigned to, you can do a lot of commerce. But that requires all of the points of intersection in that commercial transaction to comply. So when you're laundering money, including very, very large amounts of money, and somebody just doesn't do what they need to do, you lack the insurance in that moment, and you lack the security in that moment to make sure it doesn't ping that plane. And it's a lot easier to ping that plane and create a fatal event if the actual construction of items on that plane, up to and including the guidance system, up to and including other structural elements that are already known through inspection reports to have a weakness that can be associated through some other kind of coating with other things that can be triggered. If you have associated with the product development and manufacture people that have been intentionally sabotaged, if you take their certifications and you misrepresent them, or if you give them to people who are using that information for highly illegal activity, and somehow they just have an oops moment, which is not an oops moment. Somewhere somebody has something that is cognizant enough, and they say, no, I'm not complying. Bam! And I have been a witness to this far too many times to know it's not absolutely true. I happen to actually personally be very important for airliner safety. So does whoever it is that brokers the deals that are running on these aircraft while they're in flight. I have a list here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12. Including one very recently, last week. 12 small aircraft that have crashed in northern Texas alone. I can tell you honestly, at least 5 of them I was real time aware of, and 5 of them happened because somebody was running an illicit account on my identity and I refused to comply. Period. Now, nobody's busted the people doing this. They just haven't seen fit to even really pay attention. And it's not just aircraft, by the way. We're also talking about facilities that manufacture petrochemicals. We're also talking about facilities that are supposed to be involved with the production of gas and oil. And I'm just talking about Texas right now. What I'm not talking about is what is also in this same 6-month period been an alarming increase in reports on fighter jets, military fighter jets crashing, either resulting in the fatality of the pilot or not. Just off the top of my head, without actually doing a research, I know at least 3 fighter jets, 1 reconnaissance plane, and apparently what I saw in the news last night, another refueling situation involving a fighter jet, have resulted in a plane crash. All of them happening at very important benchmark dates. And I contend whoever it is that thought that they could use crashing small planes in their vicinity as a way to cover up for their crime and underwrite future crime went too far when they started to try to draw down on me through illicit activities. I think that these specific fighter jets go, A, to an attempt I made to contact a former vice presidential candidate who also happened to be the governor of her state when she was reporting on information about military jet crashes in Iraq. And B, because somebody overstepped their bounds and because they refused to do what they were required to do by law and thought that they could continue to exploit me, that too has accrued. And it's going to continue to accrue, and it's going to continue to be this unwieldy as long as the culprits are allowed to get away with it and nobody steps in to intercede and create an alternative. Now, this also impacts other countries, including very important assets in those other countries that did not need to be intentionally murdered or downed in the way they were in order to cover up for criminals. And the thing is, you actually have a pretty amazing opportunity right now because very simple moves could create a very significant recalibration. And then that could allow for other things to manifest. But as I said in my comment regarding securitization, having a redistribution of a civil penalty in the name of some lawyer associated with a corporation that's doing wrong is very different than having an official governmental regulatory body and the authority of the prosecutorial elements of the judicial system, establishing it as crime and prosecuting the criminals, and then allowing for monetary or other asset restitution to be accorded. It's very different, and we're sorely and extraordinarily missing this in the United States of America, and it is not appropriate for us to think that we can play some high speculation finance game internationally and then try to draw on other countries and the pressure we try to put on them to prosecute as insurance for criminals within. You can start right here in Dallas. You could start right here in the DFW area. You kind of owe it. Ever since the 80s, you owe it. You owe it to this country. You owe it to other people in the world that want to have a relationship with this country. You need to finally clean up the SNL crisis. You need to deal with what really happened when you gave a bunch of other people a pass for a while, as long as they kept off the radar. And in the meantime, they set up shop and hooked up deals with actual organized crime syndicates that have now infiltrated the government. You need to start right here. I got 12 completely unnecessary insurance claims that you can start with.